Hi, students. We're here to talk about the rise of Macedonia. Where is Macedonia, Mrs. Givens? I'm glad you would ask. Here we are. So we've been talking about the Greek city-states, and that's on this peninsula here. Just up to the north was a land called Macedonia. It says North Macedonia here because that's what it's called now in 2020. But at the time, this was Macedonia. Macedonia had been part of the Persian Empire. If you guys remember, Persia controlled a whole bunch of this land, including Macedonia. But when the Greeks fought Xerxes off, Macedonia won their independence also. So, let me go back to my whiteboard. All right, in the year 359 BCE, the king of Macedonia was killed, and his son was just a little baby, and nobody wants to make a little baby a king. So instead, the king's brother, Philip, became the new king. So now Philip is king of Macedonia. And Philip did all kinds of really cool things to make the Macedonia even stronger. He made the military stronger by teaching the phalanx how to move positions, but without losing their shape. I'm going to show you an example of that in just a minute. They also made a long pike. You know, I talked to you about, I'm going to stand up for a second. I wish I had an example, but you have to pretend like this is a really long stake. And the Greeks fought with their shield here and their stake here. Well, the Macedonians made one of these, but it was like twice as long. It came way, 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 way out far. And they called that's called a pike. But they called specifically their really long pike was a sarissa. And what it did, because it was jutted out really, really far, like further than I can reach, longer than my arm, it kept their enemies far away from them, so they couldn't get right up on them and hurt them. And he also encouraged his army to fight with great discipline. So I want to show you an example of what I mean by keeping the phalanx to be able to move, but without losing their order. And the best way to do that is a modern day marching band. So watch this for just a minute or two. So watch how they stay right where they are, but they change their shapes. They move like this, and they move like this, and they move like this, and they move like this, but they keep their lines. We'll just watch for another minute because I think it's neat. Look at that. Isn't that really cool? Well, imagine if this were an army. If they could move like that so fluidly and keep their shape however they needed to be, they could fight some really cool battles. Because the Greeks and the other armies, they didn't know how to do that. They had their phalanx, but they could just walk straight forward. If they wanted to turn this way, everybody's all messed up. And Philip taught his armies how to move like this marching band is moving. Okay, so in 338 BCE, Philip and his son Alexander went down. Let's go back to this map. Where are we? Philip and his son Alexander from up here came down here and conquered all these city-states. And now all of Greece is united under a Macedonian hood. And Philip told them that they could keep their own individual governments. So Athens still got to run like Athens, and Sparta still got to run like Sparta. But overall, they have to understand that their major leader is Macedonia. And if Macedonia calls on them for help, they must help. Well, that help did come when he said that he wanted to conquer Persia. Now remember, this is Persia at the time was the greatest empire on earth. And this king of Macedonia is saying he's going to conquer Persia. But before he could do that, he was murdered at his daughter's wedding. Doesn't that suck? His daughter was getting married and somebody murdered him. Then Alexander, his son, took control. And Alexander was brilliant. He had had this really, really good teacher named Aristotle. Aristotle is now, in modern days, a very, very famous philosopher from a long time ago. And Aristotle was Alexander's teacher. And usually, if your teacher is really, really smart and you care, then you become really, really smart. So Alexander was brilliant. He had had a brilliant teacher, and his favorite book was the Iliad. The Iliad, that original epic poem by Homer, that now, years later, when people have learned how to read and write, they've written it down. His favorite book is the Iliad. And the Iliad is all about adventure. And so Alexander wants to be adventurous. He's read this book and it's made him excited about adventure around the world. And he wants to do it too. So after his dad died at the daughter's wedding, which would be Alexander's sister, but after his dad died, a whole bunch of the Greek city-states started rebelling and revolting against Macedonia, trying to get their own independence again. Well, Alexander was not having any of that, and he crushed them. And to make sure they understood how serious he was, he completely burned to the ground the city-state of Thebes. It was a Greek city-state. And when he did that, the Greeks kind of backed off and were like, okay, we will obey you, Alexander of Macedonia. Well, after he did that, he decided that he was going to conquer Persia. He's going to do what his dad wanted to do, and Macedonia is going to conquer Persia. So he sets off with 30,000, oops, not supposed to say foot, 30,000 foot soldiers and 5,500 cavalry. Cavalry, those are horse soldiers. I mean, the horses aren't the soldiers ride on the horses. Hopefully you know that. Okay, so he sets off. And let's go back to the map. Make that a little bit smaller. Okay, so he walks there. They start off here, and his soldiers go all the way through here and all the way, the whole way He's liberating all these areas from the Persians. He goes through, he fights battles, he conquers, and now this land is no longer Persian land, it's now his Macedonian land. He goes through Turkey, and they take Persia's over here, but he takes this little side trip and he marches his soldiers all the way down here to Egypt. And he stays in Egypt for a while. He likes it there. It's a pretty cool place. While he's there, he founds a city and he names it after himself, called Alexandria. Let me go back to my Alexandria. Needs an A. The Egyptian city of Alexandria was named after Alexander of Macedonia while he was walking through. So they hung out in Egypt for a while, and then they came back up this way, and they came all the way over to Iran. Big battle, big war, and in 330 BCE, he won. He conquered Persia. Yay! He's done everything he wanted to do. He's done everything his father wanted to do. Persia is conquered. It's gone. Now Macedonia is in charge. Let's go back to the map one more time. Macedonia now controls everywhere, all this peninsula, all the way over to here, all the way down to here, all the way to Egypt, all the way back over to Iran. Then Iran, sorry, which was Persia then. Then instead of saying, yay, I did everything I wanted, I'm gonna quit now. No, he had this attitude and he said, no, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. But I forgot one thing. When he got here, he had conquered all of this in only 11 years. And I understand that you are 12. So 11 years sounds like a long time to you. It's like your whole lifetime. It's not really that long when we're talking about all of history. And he conquered a lot of land in just 11 years. And because of that, they call him Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great. He got that kind of nickname when he conquered Persia. So he was too cocky, too arrogant, didn't want to stop. And he said, no, we are going to go further east. He wanted to conquer the whole world. Except you have to understand that at this time, they didn't actually know much about the world. So he wanted to conquer the whole world that he knew existed. And so they kept going east. And when they got to about here, which Pakistan did not exist at the time, but modern day, what we call Pakistan, he had some bad luck. And his bad luck was, first, his horse died. Like he really, really, really loved his horse. And his horse was injured in battle, injured too badly to recover, and his horse died. So he must have been really sad. And then after his horse died, his soldiers started to mutiny. Mutiny means to not listen to orders at all, refuse to do anything you say, and just do their own thing. They were done. They wanted to go back home. And so finally, you know, when all your soldiers are mutinying and nobody's paying any attention to you, didn't really have any choice in the matter. So they turned around and started coming back west. And when they got over here to Babylon, he died of a fever. It says he died of a fever. We're talking about the 330s BCE. This is over 2,000 years ago. They didn't know too much about medicine back then. Who knows what killed him, but he got really hot and he died. And his son was a little baby. And like we talked about before, how his father Philip took power. Kind of the same thing happened when Alexander the Great died. His son was a little baby. And so instead of giving the entire empire to a little baby, his generals, his military leaders, his generals took all the land of that Alexander the Great had conquered for Macedonia, and they broke it up into parts. And they said, let's see, Emma becomes the king of this place, and Eleazar is the king of this place, and Solstice is the king here, and Exia is the king here, and Yoha is the king here, and so on and so forth. I know some of you are girls, and I said king, but you would have had to have been a boy at the time to get it. And so this great empire that Alexander conquered, it didn't really stay an empire for very long. He died, and then his leaders broke it all up. One of the places that was pretty famous, has some famous names, was one of Alexander's generals was named Ptolemy. So I'm just going to put like Ptolemy here. And Ptolemy took over Egypt. And this guy's family led Egypt for 300 years. It means like when Ptolemy died, his son became the next ruler. And when he died, his son became the ruler. And when his son died, his son became the ruler, so on and so forth. And the very last ruler of Egypt from Ptolemy's family was Cleopatra. You've probably all heard this name, Cleopatra, and that's where she comes from. She was the last person in the family line of Ptolemy to lead Egypt from one of Alexander the Great's generals. Now, one thing that Alexander the Great did, even though his actual empire didn't last very long. I mean, Alexander the Great was 32 years old when he died. So, and he was 32 when he died, and it took him 11 years to do all that conquering. So really it was 11 years. I mean, that's nothing. Could you imagine an entire empire having begun when you were a 1-year-old baby and it collapsing now? That's wild. His empire, it didn't last very long at all. But what it did was it changed the world. How did it change the world, Mrs. Givens? It changed the world because everywhere he went, he set up Greek-style cities. Greek style based on the Greek culture and, Greek culture. And the Greek people, they didn't call themselves Greek. That's just our word that we say. They called themselves Hellenes. And so when we say Hellenistic, he spread Hellenistic culture all across. Let's go back to our map. He took Greek culture, Hellenistic culture, culture from this area. I know he's from Macedonia, but the Macedonians and the Greeks had very similar cultures. So the people that lived in this region, they called themselves Hellenes. And he took this culture and spread it all the way to Turkey, down all the way through this area, all the way to Egypt, all the way back up, all the way through Iraq, all the way through Iran, over here towards Pakistan. All this area, he spread Hellenistic culture. And it was a big deal to spread your culture all the way through here. That's it. Okay, bye-bye.